Hi everyone, and welcome to the overview on assessment requirements for assessment 3, which is due at the end of week 11 for the module. So the weighting for this assessment is 50%, and you have 2,500 words for your case study. As it's a case study, I'm quite comfortable with you using headings to be able to structure the essay and to use a combination of first person and third person writing. You can choose to use just third person, that's fine, but you're welcome to blend those. So the purpose of this paper really is to further develop these skills around screening, assessment, case formulation, and intervention planning. And the way that this will be done is you're invited to select from one of these 4 films or an episode from Redfern Now to actually identify a key protagonist from your film and to assume the role of counselor as if you were going to work with that character as your client. Now, you're wanting to keep in mind that you also need to talk about a substance abuse counselling model and what kind of counselling framework you would use in terms of supporting this person. So let's look at the marking criteria to begin with, because this will give us some clear direction around what's expected. There's 5 key criteria. So you're needing to present a case overview or case summary for criteria number 1. So zooming into that particular character or client and describing the client's presentation, taking into account the context in which they're functioning. And this needs to be relevant and true to the film. So remembering that I've watched all of these films, I know the characters very, very well. I've also graded this paper multiple times in the past, so I'm feeling really comfortable. Use your word count here very wisely because it is just descriptive writing. For assessment 2, that's where you're going to start to do some research and apply the theory covered to date in the module. So you're going to be talking about screening for that client. What screening tools do you think would be appropriate and inform the need for further assessment? You're going to talk about other assessment issues, which might include mental health issues, familial issues, or discussion around how well supported that client is to be able to engage in counselling and in a change process, looking at the psychosocial needs of the client, and then moving out of assessment into case formulation using your 5 Ps model. So there needs to be sort of a logical sequence and structure to the way in which you undertake this analysis of your client or / character from the film. Criteria 3 is to accurately describe the substance abuse counselling model that you would use in terms of supporting this client. Now, in this module, we very much focused on motivational interviewing as the substance abuse counselling model, so you're all very familiar with the principles and the benefits of MI. So I'm expecting to see that in your assessments. You might be approaching the case study from a different perspective, more from a relapse prevention management perspective. So that would be an alternative substance abuse counselling model that you can use to talk about the way in which you're going to intervene and support your client. Now, criteria number 4 looks at counselling or treatment processes, client outcomes, any challenges that might arise, supports that are provided. So what I have found is that criteria is best addressed by discussing a general counselling framework that would inform your work with the client. So you might choose to research and write about working with the client from a person-centered perspective, or a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, or a dialectical behavior therapy perspective, or a trauma-informed perspective. You might choose another framework. Students in the past have, particular leanings towards existential or narrative therapy. I'm more than happy for you to refer to any general counseling model in terms of working with a client, as long as you integrate theory and you apply it directly to the client's presentation and establish its benefits, why it would be effective for that particular client from the movie. And lastly, you're needing to present a discussion on ethical considerations. So we'll be looking at this in the workshop, but different ethical considerations specific to people struggling with an SUD issue. So I've kind of, unpacked this marking criteria, and I've offered, some headings that you might find helpful in terms of structuring your essay. Please don't feel locked in to using these particular headings, but to me they kind of make sense. And I like the idea of headings for this essay because it's actually quite difficult to stay focused and to allocate word count strategically when you've got 2,500 words to play with. So one way of doing it is the use of headings, which kind of ensures that you stay really focused on that particular section and topic. So I'm wanting to see a formal introduction. And that introduction really needs to clearly signpost for me what your assignment is about, what the substance use dependency looks like for that client, and to also provide a statement of intent in your actual introduction. So a statement around this critique will discuss, if you're going to refer to the movie in your introduction, you will need to cite that using accurate APA 6 referencing style. So I'm more than happy to help you format that in the workshop if you kindly remind me. But it's really important generally, to kind of find the information for Rabbit Hole and who directed, produced. I just went to Wikipedia and it was all there for me, and then I referred to the APA 6 reference guide and formatted it accordingly. So I've offered you this kind of template of an introduction that I wrote for an assignment of mine some time ago. Not suggesting that it's a perfect introduction, but it kind of gives you a structure or example of how to go about structuring an introduction for a case study for this film. So look, you're welcome to toss it, or hopefully you'll find it helpful in terms of writing your introduction. So I'm needing to see a case summary. Again, as I've said, it's descriptive writing. It really needs to be brief. Please don't allocate a lot of word count here because I'm very familiar with all of the movies. You really need to zoom in to the client presentation in the movie for that particular section. In your assessment section, it's likely that you'll dip into Prochaska and DiClementi's change model, identifying perhaps screening tools that would be appropriate to inform further assessment, and then kind of moving into the assessment phase of your client, looking at any mental health sort of indicators, any other sort of counseling themes that might be emerging for that person, whether it's grief and loss, or familial conflict, and of course their substance use dependency and what that looks like. So the severity and duration and the nuances around their use. And then that will inform your case formulation. So you'll be applying the 5 Ps accordingly. So you'll need to do some research around that. I know the textbook offers a whole chapter which is really informative and easy to follow. Again, looking at how you're going to work therapeutically with this client. So looking at the substance abuse counseling model, whether you discuss motivational interviewing, relapse prevention, is really going to be informed by where you choose to intervene with the client. So in the past, students have said to me, it's a really long movie. It's really difficult to be able to know exactly where to intervene. I'm going to leave that to your discretion as long as you inform me in your essay. So an example is Candy. In the movie Candy, there is a section in the movie in which she's in the hospital having lost a child because of her SUD, and her partner Daniel comes alongside. It's likely that a social worker in real life would probably intervene at that point and recommend counselling. You might choose to come in at that point and work with Candy or Daniel, or with them as a couple. Or you might choose to intervene with Candy right at the end of the movie when we see the couple go their separate ways. Candy's been supported through detox and some rehab, and so her risk of relapse is quite high at that time in the movie, and it would be ideal in terms of intervention to work around relapse prevention and management, and perhaps she'd be in a better place to actually process some of the grief and loss experience around the loss of a child, the loss of the relationship. So I'm quite flexible around that, as long as you're really clear throughout the paper where you're going to be focusing your intervention. And lastly, you do need to look at ethical considerations. So I'm asking for you to do this in relation to addiction specifically. So whatever research you do has to be relevant to people in active addiction engaged in counselling and the likely ethical dilemmas that will present. So I've given you some examples. There's mandatory reporting. What if your client discloses to you that they are actually currently using and conducting breaking and enters to be able to fund their use? How would you manage that? How would you manage your own personal biases around, say, sex work if the client discloses that? And how would you manage your own counter-transference with the client, if your stuff gets triggered? Another issue might be duty of care around suicidal ideation and self-harm being a risk for the client. So we'll have an opportunity in the workshop to actually zoom into ethical considerations and to unpack those further. Lastly, you need to provide a formal conclusion to your paper, giving a summary. And it's always a great idea, I think, in reflective essays or case studies to really highlight what your key learning outcomes have been. So what will you take away from having participated in this critique of the film and the client into future client work? And then I'm needing to see a reference list. So for a paper that's 2,500 words, I think it's reasonable to expect at least 10 references, because that demonstrates, broad reading and research. And you're also needing to apply APA 6 referencing style. I hope that you found this helpful. We will have opportunity to clarify at the workshop.